what can we do instead? Right. Because I know that we do. The reality is there, especially with COVID and even before COVID, there are families that might be having some tough time. There might be some students that are dealing with some challenges.
Mhm.
And if we don't want to approach things from a savioristic mindset or approach, how would you suggest maybe some strategies in that sense of, okay, I want to help, but I don't want to just assume that they need my help. So how would you maybe address those type of things?
I think we'd have to ask,
Mhm.
especially if, there's some clear indicators perhaps that, maybe a family could use the free and reduced lunch application. Um, Maybe they need help logging on to their child's school, whatever your school uses for grades, or like our school does some gift cards around the holidays so that people can buy extra food, buy some clothes or new shoes. But we can ask a family, how can we help? Like we have some funds available. What would be helpful to you? Would you like help? Would be another
Mm.
good one, a good way to start, because maybe they don't want the help. And that's okay. It's their family, it's their life. Um, there were some kids last year that I bought some of the gift cards for, and I knew in advance who needed them. And I knew the girls really wanted lip gloss.
Mm.
And I knew some of the dads were having a hard time getting to work. So I bought makeup, like for a local makeup location, a store near here, and gas station gift cards. And those were disseminated to the families. They didn't
Yeah.
know it came from me. Um, but it's helpful to ask, do you want help, and what kind of help would be useful to you? Because it could easily be construed as like some kind of negative charity. I dropped off gift cards at one student's house and talked with a family member who said, well, we're not poor and we don't actually, and she had recently taken in multiple children into her home that were not her children. So I said, it's a gesture that, knowing that your grocery bill has increased dramatically, taking in several teenagers, we're grateful that they have a safe place to be and that they're fed and they're cared for. Um, so
How
being
did
able,
you take it when they said, "Hey, we're not poor," or her response? I mean, how did it make you? Like, what were your thoughts when she
well,
responded
I
that way?
immediately thought like, we did not do our homework here to know, like, does she want any help? Because we didn't ask.
Mm.
We assumed that some extra grocery gift cards would be helpful.
Yeah.
And perhaps it was offensive to her. And she wound up being really grateful. And she's a person I can still communicate with to this day about the needs of the students she cares for. Um, but initially that could have gone in a very different
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. So, and again, that's just a lesson learned.
Mhm.
And just like what you said, I always tell people, just ask. Just say, hey, listen, I overheard something, or I noticed you say something, or I noticed Johnny's shoes have a few holes in them. Is there anything I can do to support? Because I do have a connection, or I got to get my kids a pair of shoes. I mean, would you have a problem if I got Johnny a pair of shoes as well? Like those type of things, as opposed to showing up at Johnny's house with the pair of shoes, or when Johnny comes to school, hey, throw those away, put these on now. I hooked you up. I think just asking
Mhm.
can go so far, but sometimes we just assume that we already know what someone needs or the
Mhm.
resources because we might have access to them, and we just automatically assume, and that's where things can go the wrong direction.
Mhm.
So okay, so I'm gonna run down the list one more time and make sure I didn't miss anything. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the first point when it comes to strategies for working with students that are different than you, working with diverse population, if you do not look or share the same background and demographics of the current population that you're working with, that you're serving with in that community, the first one we had was having an empathetic lens. Number two was developing trust. And number three is avoiding the saviorism complex. What would be number four?
Number four, we want to approach everything with an asset-based
Mm.
lens. So similar to that first one, where when you're talking with your colleagues and check the words you're using and the mindset you're exhibiting with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, We want to, when we're sitting with the kids, like working with the kids or talking to the kids, providing feedback, a retake, a redo, whatever it is, we want to look at what can they do and communicate that to the student. So I've had students sit in my class like, I just can't, I can't. And then we have to flip it around and, okay, so show me what part you can do. Tell me what your thoughts are on this part. Or that's an interesting idea. How did you approach it? So something that puts them in control, puts them in the driver's seat of whatever they're supposed to be doing or learning, and looking at it from an asset, something good that they can bring, something that they're on the right track, or something of that nature.
Now, do you believe that when we come from a deficit mindset, folks might lower their standards in regards to their approach? So, I don't, like you said, I don't think this child can do it. And so we give them easier work, or we don't really challenge them. Is that kind of what you mean as well?
Yeah, it definitely could lead to reduced workloads
Mhm.
or different tasks. I had several students in my class today that they don't know any English yet,
Mhm.
but it's yet, they still did the
Right.
lab. They showed me what they could do. So we worked on the metric system today. They could use all the implements and they could tell me then, oh, yes, the bigger one or the smaller one, or yes or no. But just by shaking their heads, they didn't have the vocabulary, gesturing bigger, smaller, but they knew, and it allowed me to see what they did know rather
Mhm.
than, well, it could be that a teacher could look at a student like, well, they can't communicate with me in English, so I'll just have them do this other thing on the computer, or I guess I just can't work with them. So we've got to stay engaged with our kids no matter what they're presenting us with, and make sure we're looking at the assets and the things that they can do and the gifts that they do have, and use that as a stepping stone for where to go next.
I've seen teachers where, for example, let's say it's students where English, Spanish might be their first language, and I've seen teachers have the Spanish English dictionary, or utilize Google Translate. Try to speak to them in their language. Um, Even if Spanish is their I guess Spanish is their second language in that case for the teacher side. But I think that's important. At least they're trying.
Mhm.
And sometimes we just get to that. This is America, learn the language type of mindset, and it's just not fair to our kids if that's the approach that you take. I've heard that. So if folks are saying, "Oh no, teachers surely wouldn't say anything," I literally have heard teachers
Oh,
say that.
same.
So it happens.
Mhm.
And so if that's the mindset that you're having, then first of all, you shouldn't be in the classroom. You shouldn't be in front of students. I mean, let's start there. However, that's that deficit mindset.
Mhm.
Even when, let me ask you this, okay? So outside of language, what if a student's reading scores aren't at grade level, or math at the same time, those type of things? What are some of the suggestions that you have in those type of situations?
So there's still got to be background knowledge that the child does have, something that they do know, and we can work from there.
Mm,
We don't want to. Oftentimes, those things come with different layers that students need to learn. So, no one's going to take calculus if they haven't taken other forms of math before, been successful, learned the essentials of algebra and geometry and trigonometry. So we can't pretend that those things don't matter, but there's
mm,
got to be a starting place. So, so students maybe are not using positive and negative numbers accurately, then we've got to start there and then combine it with algebra. There's got to be multiple on ramps to allow them to work with their same age peers with cognitively challenging material to allow them to grow. But there's got to be a place to start with something they do know to make it less daunting, because it
mm.
can't seem impossible, or a student's not going to continue to think, or it's because it's overwhelming.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I would say this when it comes to asset based lens, and I talk a lot about it. There's several different strategies, such as hip hop education. There is project based learning. There's what else do we have? We have, just anything culturally responsive, I believe, would be considered asset based. But we definitely want to avoid any sort of self fulfilling prophecies, any
Mm.
type of stereotype threats. Our role as educators is, again, to promote positive affirmation. And again, I shout out to Dr. Holloman. I had a really good conversation with her this morning, and she just really kept emphasizing the importance of referring to your students, your kids, as scholars, was just a primary example. I mean, her whole dissertation, her research and everything all involved that type of language, and just being able to look at, like you said, okay, where are you at right now? Okay, let's take you where you are right now and let's build from there. I just saw an article not too long ago regarding the learning loss stuff. I think
Mhm.
learning loss, that whole conversation is just a deficit frame.
Mhm.
I saw it a lot last year, and then the year before that when pandemic first hit, and I'm still seeing that conversation about learning loss, achievement gap, and all these type of conversations, again, from a deficit frame. So I definitely agree we should change our mindset and change the way that we're speaking or referring to our kids and looking at our kids. So thank you
Mhm.
for that. Now we got four. We'll run it down one more time. Have an empathetic lens, have trust, avoid the saviorism, asset-based lens. Alyssa, I think the folks out there deserve at least one more. Can you dig into the vault? Can you pull into the crates? Is there at least one more? Can we round it up to five?
Yes, I think as educators, especially when we're working with students that maybe do not match us in whatever way we're referring to, it's really important to be authentic. So there's no magical like icebreaker or way to enter, exit a room that's going to make every kid blend with their teacher. So it's important as educators that we remain vulnerable too.
Yeah.
I had a container of pipetters and I dropped all the pipette tips all over the floor. But it's vulnerability because I trip on things sometimes too. So, kids helped me clean them up. But it's important that when we're working with our students, we allow students to be seen and heard. Um, we don't know it all, and we never will because
Yeah.
technology changes rapidly. And I will, working with all the students I work with, I will never know what it's like to be in their shoes 100% of the time. I can hear commonalities among different groups of my students, but it's not the same. I haven't actually walked in those shoes and I haven't actually lived that experience. I can speak multiple languages, but I'm not going to know all of them of all my students that come through my door. So it's imperative that as we're trying to be authentic and we're trying to be trustworthy and build those relationships, that we also build a sense of belonging by asking students to tell us about themselves and share things about ourselves, because we're not perfect. We're not done. We can always continue to learn and grow. um, I think that vulnerability is a big deal there in being
Yeah.
authentic.
That's part of being authentic, right? Um, you know, we ask our kids to tell us about okay, for your journal prompt, if you were to, if you were to on an island, what would, we ask these questions where some of those questions can be very vulnerable. Now, and
Mhm.
and sometimes our teachers read them. Sometimes the journals are private, and the kids, just kind of doing it for their own. Just the teacher would just see if they finished or not, if they just wrote, but they're not reading the journals. But sometimes we ask our students to open up and share with us. Going back to the whole conversation initially where we were talking about trust, we don't do the same thing,
Mhm.
and we wonder why. Oh, I don't understand why I don't have the relationship, why I don't have that trust, or why I don't have these things. Or on the other side, we have teachers who will try to do handshakes and high fives and rap or dance to the latest dance moves on TikTok, try to do all these things that they wouldn't normally do on their own time.
Right. Well, that's
So
the thing. If they don't
mhm,
normally do it,
yeah.
it comes across to kids as really insincere and kind of
Mhm.
bizarre. Like, what are you doing? This is not you. Like, they know. They know. If it's what you normally do
Yeah,
anyway, then you do you. Like, that's
yeah,
fine because then you're being your authentic self. But
yeah,
that's not going to be the thing that suddenly like keys in a bunch of kids.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I see that a lot, and like you said, the kids will look at you. I've seen kids straight up like pretend like they're on your side, like they're, oh yeah, keep going, yeah, yeah, and then the camera's up, and they're secretly, kids will clown you.
Hmm.
I think it's really important to really be authentic. I've always been one of those individuals who likes to joke around with my kids, and I have a great time. And we'll do your mama jokes, we'll roast each other, we'll have the whole sessions. And because when kids start to try to roast me, I say, oh, you want to go right now? We could do this right now. I'll do a 10-minute stand-up comedy on you right now. I'll be ready to go. So I'm always loaded. So, but it's fun. But that's who I am. That's what I
Right.
like to do. That I'm not putting on a show. I'm not pretending to be somebody that I'm not. And I think we can connect with our kids however we need to connect, in our own way. And even when situations, again, going back to the conversation about if you reflect different than your students and you say, well, I'm not into hip hop, or I'm not into this rock band, or I'm not into whatever it is, but you can learn about those things. It doesn't mean that you have to try to write lyrics and all those things, but
Right.
you can ask questions. And going back to you gave a great example about the two by 10, just sitting there and just learning from your students, and letting them tell you, I didn't know anything about powwows. I didn't know any of things about the category, but the kids were really into it. And so I started asking questions. Tell me about the different categories. Okay, so I noticed that the outfit that you had on looked different than some of the other categories. Tell me about that. And then just sit there and listen to them go and learn from our kids. But if we aren't doing those type of things, then we're not really being authentic. So yeah. Now I'm gonna throw out, if there are any questions out there, so feel free. We're gonna wrap things up, folks. If you have a question for Alyssa, man, I am doing my best, but I'm sorry I've been butchering your name, but it's definitely something I'm working on. So thank you for your patience on that. But folks, if you have some questions, feel free to pop them in. And then we'll just kind of start wrapping things up. Did you have any final thoughts, any final words that we haven't touched on that you want to add to the conversation?
I don't have anything totally different. But I just think it's a constant process, and especially considering wherever maybe we grew up or what experiences we had in childhood, it's different for everybody, and just acknowledging that is okay. But we're all capable of learning. You showed that you learned a lot about kids on a reservation, and as long as we're willing to ask our students and learn from them in a sincere way that they know that we care and we're listening, that also builds that trust and builds that relationship. So always be ready for that.
Always be ready. Now, if we have some folks that want to connect with you, what are the best ways to reach you online?
Educationally, I'm on Twitter a lot. So my handle's here, ticking it across the bottom of the screen. But in case you're listening, it's at Alyssa_Gong.
All right. Well, Alyssa, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really a privilege.
My honor. My honor. Well, folks, final thoughts real quick. By the way, if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy the live stream, I'm trying to build up the channel. So if you enjoyed the live stream, please subscribe. What do they say? Smash that like button, subscribe button, follow me. That means a lot. If you listen to the show, the regular podcast on Mondays via audio, we appreciate that as well. But feel free to share the content. It's helpful, and we really do appreciate it. My final, I'm running down real quick. She said, empathetic lens, trust, avoid saviorism, have an asset-based lens, and be authentic. I mean, sounds simple, but it's something that we can all work on. And I have not been perfect myself. It's not something that I don't believe that you have arrived. I believe that it's a journey that we're all taking and we're all working towards, and that's really important. So feel free to shoot me an email, follow. There is the Twitter handle down there for Alyssa is right there. Make sure that you follow her as well. Now, remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.